Good evening, everyone, and welcome to ACP Live, a work in progress showcase and discussion series featuring our artist commissioning program awardees. My name is Kelly Olshan, and I'm a program manager at Queens Council of the Arts. Tonight, we're thrilled to highlight the work of Jaime Sunwoo alongside partnering organizations Flushing Town Hall, Queen's Memory, and the Korea Society. Jaime is the creator of Specially Processed American Me, and this year's ACP awardee in playwriting representing the Flushing neighborhood. Every year, this program focuses on two neighborhoods in Queens, and this year we're highlighting the community of Flushing as well as the Maspeth Ridgewood area. Before we dive in, I want to give you a little bit of background on the Artist Commissioning Program and how we came to be here. Queens Council of the Arts Artist Commissioning Program aims to democratize who can commission art, a process that has traditionally been reserved for a privileged few. So rather than the wealthy elite deciding what new culture is created and celebrated, we invite a cohort of amazing Queens community members to decide. These art commissioners award $10,000 commissions to playwrights, choreographers, and composers to tell untold stories that resonate with their communities, and then they stay on to advise the artists as they develop this new original work. I am really pleased to introduce you to one of these incredible art commissioners for the Flushing group who will be moderating tonight's event. Sejan Park is an incredibly smart and thoughtful educator, arts manager, and artist, and has been such an asset to this program. Watching her review artist proposals was really fascinating, as she always has something compelling to say about ways to tell untold stories around Asian American identity, immigrant families, and underrepresented protagonists. When she's not commissioning art with ACP, she serves as the education coordinator for the Noguchi Museum, where she leads school, family, adult, and community programs, including the organization's Teen Advisory Board, as well as making visual artwork as an artist in her own right. Sejan, the virtual floor is yours.
Kelly, thank you so much for that introduction. It's been such a pleasure being an ACP commissioner and working alongside everyone to center projects just like Jaime's play, Specially Processed American Me. As one of the two performances we've selected, we're incredibly excited to present a preview of Jaime's project tonight. So tonight's event is not only a taste of Specially Processed American Me, but it's an opportunity to also reflect on the 70th anniversary of the Korean War, which was a major historical event which plays a very big central role in Jaime's project. So we also want to let you know that this is just a teaser of Jaime's full presentation of her work, and that will be a reading of her full performance, which will be co-presented by QCA의 and Flushing Town Hall on September 2nd from 8 to 9:30 p.m. And you can actually RSVP for that event in the link in the chat. So with all that shared, I'd like to introduce everyone here in this virtual space before we start. We've invited some very exciting members of the Korean community for this panel discussion. So panelists, if you don't mind, please give the audience members a wave when I introduce you so that they know who you are. Let's see. I'll try to introduce everyone in alphabetical order. Audience members, please welcome ACP Art Commissioner and Flushing Chamber of Commerce Executive Director John Cho. Executive Director of the Korean American Family Service Center, Ji-Hae Fisher. KoreanAmericanStory.org co-founder and Executive Director, H.J. Lee. And Stony Brook University Professor Hee-Jong Son. And of course, last but not least, we have Jaime Sunwoo herself. We're also going to be dropping everyone's names in the chat box just for your reference. And ultimately, we're just so lucky to have everyone here. So thank you. And next, I just want to quickly run over tonight's agenda just so everyone knows what's happening tonight. We'll first start off with Jaime and John introducing the project, and then we'll pass off the mic to Ji-Hae Fisher to share more about the Korean American Family Service Center. They're our featured community partner for tonight. Then we'll go back and forth with Jaime sharing segments from her play. And the panelists will talk about themes from those segments that especially resonate with them, especially thinking and considering the Korean War. Lastly, we'll open up the chat box for a Q&A with the audience. So right now and during the program, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to type them in the chat box. Sean Choi from Flushing Town Hall is also with us, and he's helping us collect those questions and comments to be shared at the very end for the Q&A. So Jaime, I'm going to now turn over the mic to you with the question. Just thinking and knowing that your project it's been cultivating for some time. Could you please share what exactly motivated you to create Specially Processed American Meat?
Sure. So I started this play about 2.5 years ago, and I really started it because I've always been really curious about how Spam got into Asian cuisine. So a lot of my Asian American friends with heritage from Korea and Guam, Hawaii, the Philippines, Japan, all are very passionate about Spam. And it made me think, how did it become this Asian staple when it's actually from Austin, Minnesota? So I ended up doing some research, and it's actually because it was part of American military K rations during World War II and the Korean War. So soldiers brought it over, it was absorbed into the local cuisine, and now Asian Americans are particularly drawn to it because over time, it became less popular with white Americans. So it's a particular American food that really stands out because of the stigma. And I think a lot of Asian Americans like myself have a very kind of like complicated relationship with Spam. And for me, Spam, because it has so much history and sort of this emotional baggage that comes along with it, I think it's really a right place to start to talk about things like class, immigration, war, these more difficult topics that we can kind of give ourselves permission to talk about by talking about something as mundane and simple as, hey, so how did you start eating Spam? You know, how do you cook it? And then kind of leading that conversation from there. So the theater piece is very much uses Spam as a starting point for these dialogues. And for me personally, it was a great way to learn about my own family history because it gave me permission to ask my parents and grandparents about the war, which is a very sensitive, difficult topic to talk about for most Korean Americans and all Koreans.
Thank you so much, Jaime. And I'm just so excited to see how everyone here in this panel tonight will explore Spam's resonance and its special symbolism, I guess, just throughout tonight's event too. And I think that also just your really creative way of using Spam as a vehicle to talk about these important issues is kind of a great segue to turning the mic over to John. So John, I just want to shed some light on ACP's perspective as a commissioner, as a fellow commissioner. So John, you're also a fellow commissioner. And I just want to ask you, why was it important for you to uplift Jaime's project, especially thinking about how it might resonate with the Flushing community?
Sure. Thank you, Sejin. I wanted to explain to the audience that it's often difficult to get art and culture to a broad audience in Flushing for a lot of different reasons, but I think primarily because oftentimes art is relegated to the museum or the theater and not to the lived experience of people's lives. And I think for us, our mission was to uplift the voices and the untold stories that really resonate with our community in Flushing. As many of you know, Flushing is one of the most multicultural and diverse communities in the United States, but it also has a very large Korean American population. And I felt, as someone who has worked with the Korean American community for many years, that war and the aftermath of war, especially the Korean War, is something that needs to be discussed in the Korean community here in New York, and especially in Flushing, because the Korean War, for a lot of people, represents rupture, represents division. And we experience a lot of that rupture and division now in our community organizing, in our building of small businesses and churches and other institutions. There's still a lot of division and conflict that has not been resolved, that people don't talk about. And so we felt as art commissioners that someone like Jaime would really bring a different type of perspective on this really difficult issue in a way that is readily digestible and easy for people who don't have an art history background to really connect with, people who may run a business or who are students, people who go to church. Everyone understands the importance of spam, but may not have really had a chance to reflect on why do we eat spam. And I think that's something that we felt as art commissioners, Jaime was very uniquely positioned to bring to the table in this community.
Yes, thank you so much, Sean. You've said all I've had in my mind. Jaime's project just brings up so many of these issues that are still happening today. And the thing is, if we don't have the willpower to face those issues, we're never going to have them resolved. So I think that's more of what we'll be exploring today's program. So now I'm going to transition into Jaime Fisher's presentation about organization. So as ACP commissioners working with QCA's mission to highlight Queens-based community organizations, we've invited Jaime Fisher to share more about her organization, the Korean American Family Service Center. And she's, again, our featured community partner. So as an important note, tonight's event is accepting donations. And all donations will be evenly split between QCA and the Korean American Family Service Center. So the link, as a reminder, is in the program description below. So with that being shared, let's segue into learning more about KAFSC and the amazing work that they do in the Flushing community.
Hello, my name is Jaime Fisher, and I am the Executive Director at the Korean American Family Service Center, also known as KAFSC. It is my honor to introduce this amazing organization with you all while I share some photos. KAFSC's mission is to support and empower adults, youth, and children to lead safe and healthy lives based on dignity, compassion, and mutual respect. We are committed to preventing and ending domestic violence, sexual assault, and relationship abuse, and creating a violence-free society. To accomplish our mission, KAFSC focuses its programming in 4 key areas. Number 1, domestic violence and sexual assault intervention through the bilingual 24-hour hotline, counseling, 24/7 operated emergency shelter, long-term transitional housing, legal and social service advocacy, and support groups. Number 2, economic empowerment through workforce development, 101 job search, counseling, financial literacy workshops, educational scholarships for specific skills training or certification. Number 3, children and youth development through the Hodori Little Tiger After School program, youth community project team, and parenting education. And number 4, community education and advocacy through volunteer training, annual silent march against the domestic violence, and other educational workshops. For 31 years, the KAFSC has served Korean immigrant survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking, and child abuse. Our survivors and their children are the most marginalized and vulnerable at the best of times, and even more so during this COVID-19 pandemic. 100% of KFSC staff are bilingual and bicultural. 98% of our clients are immigrants. All our services are provided in a culturally sensitive and linguistically appropriate setting. Each year, over 2,500 individuals benefit from one or more services that we offer. 100% of our clients are low to moderate income households. 90% of our domestic violence and sexual assault clients are Asian immigrants. 95% are women, and 98% have limited English proficiency. Miss Y was being abused physically, mentally, and sexually by her partner. He was threatening her and withholding immigration status for many years. Her partner is the sole financial provider, and during this pandemic, he withheld money and used the financial and public health scare to isolate Miss Y and her son from reaching out to get help. During this time, when schools were closed and Miss Y's son was home, it became evident that the partner was also sexually abusing her stepson. Through KFSC, Miss Y and her son are safely relocated and leading an independent life. This is only one of many daunting stories we encounter on a day-to-day basis, and it is our responsibility to turn these daunting stories from despair to hope. Since our inception, we understand that Korean immigrant families without a safety net needed a home for help and support. KFSC continues to be that safe haven for marginalized Korean immigrants who are affected by the domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse incidents. Our continuum of care, from crisis intervention to counseling, to case management, to housing, to survivor support, help these survivors achieve a sense of safety while empowering them as they journey towards healthy and violence-free lives. Thank you for listening, and please support this amazing organization.
Jihei, thank you so much for sharing that video and all the work you do. At first, I just knew about your organization based on knowing it from other community members, visiting your website, but upon learning more about your work through the video, it's just really made me more kind of like in awe of all you do. So thank you again for all, like everything that you do, just maintaining families, making sure that they're all together, and just making sure that they overall lead a fulfilling life. And I actually want to use that theme of family as a segue to talk about Jaime's and introducing Jaime's first video clip too. Just similarly, Jaime's play explores themes of histories that bond a family, sometimes even separates a family, and thinking about the experiences that just have these tremendous effects beyond just one generation. So next up, we're going to watch a few clips from previous performances of especially Process American Me. This first clip we'll watch is a story from Jaime's grandmother, and her grandmother shares her memories of first encountering spam, along with her recollections of the Korean War.
Spam? The first time I had spam, it was when we took refuge. The Americans, they gave it to us. That's how we ate it. The first time I ate it, I just opened the lid and scarfed it down. It's so delicious and tasty. During the war, that's how we had it, because they gave it to us. But once the fighting with the North ended, I started seeing it at their stores. I don't know if the people at the army bases got it for $1 or something. And at those stores, they have like American cigarettes and chocolate. When I ate spam, I would slice it, grill it, and eat it with rice. Only people with money were able to afford it. People without, they just couldn't buy it. It's made out of meat, so it's expensive. It reminds me of the war. I was so scared. Bombs fell. And my whole house burned to the ground. That's why I was scared. That's why I think about it. Of course I think about it. And your father, people were grabbing men and trying to take them away. So he hid beneath the floorboard. And when he was under there, he'd close the lid, so I'd open it sometimes and I'd pass him food. He couldn't get a haircut, so it grew this big. You know, a long time ago, I think, I went through all that turmoil. And a long time ago, I used to think that spam was so delicious, but now when I eat it, it's not so good. Because there's plenty to eat, that's why. Because there's so much to eat.
So Jaime, in your play, you really use spam as a way to discuss these memories that seem to have been buried. Towards the end of that part in your play, towards the end of that script, you wonder to yourself why you've never heard this story from your grandmother. You also wonder to yourself if your mother has ever heard this story. And then just thinking back to this kind of absence in our generation, and our parents not really passing down those stories and memories of the Korean War, you wonder if it was a way for your grandmother to try and protect the younger generations, you and your mom, from kind of learning about the trauma that she endured while surviving the Korean War. So this kind of makes me want to ask the panelists themselves, in general, I've been observing, and also it's present Jaime's play. In Korean society, there's this general pressure to forget and move on instead of actually dealing with the trauma and confronting it and kind of acknowledging it. Instead of acknowledging it, you just try to forget it. And this could be problematic because a lot of these issues that we even see today, just like John mentioned, these kinds of issues can't necessarily be resolved without confronting the trauma that has happened. So I'd like to ask the rest of the panel, as Korean Americans, how are we now confronting the trauma that was caused by the Korean War? And what are some different ways that you've personally, or you've seen other community members, what are the different ways we're addressing this trauma?
Well, excuse me. I guess I could start. I fully agree with Jaime in that we need to seek these stories. Personally speaking, it has to do with understanding our history first, then correlating them to how the perspectives of our parents and then our perspectives are shaped by them. So as an example, my wife, Teresa, is a very frugal person. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that her mother was a refugee from the North during the Korean War. She survived on very little. And even though her husband was a doctor, she continued to scrimp everywhere. In her life, she experienced hunger, poverty, and learned how circumstances could just change suddenly, right? And she doesn't throw away a single grain of rice, doesn't waste an ounce of water. She's known to repurpose upholstery into old curtains into upholstery. And recently we found out she also hid wads of cash around the house in case they have to uproot their lives unexpectedly. It sounds crazy, but that's her reality, right? So we interviewed for our Legacy project, which is an oral history project that we have, where we asked the younger generation to interview older generation. And she shared many harrowing stories, including having to ride on top of a train when they escaped south. They wrap themselves up with blankets so that if one of them should fall asleep, so that they don't, one of them, doesn't fall off the train and die, basically. She also told us how they had to find ways to make a living once they got to the South during a wartime, which required a lot of determination and hard work. So my daughter is also very frugal, like her mother and her grandmother. And I think it's because we're interconnected in ways that we don't even realize. So for us, we understand and appreciate that Teresa's mom is shaped by the trauma of the Korean War, right? And because we know her story, we're not bothered by it. In fact, we make gentle fun at her frugal nature. We're amazed by her ingenuity. She can MacGyver anything. We marvel at what a tough woman she is. She mowed her own lawn into the 70s. So we were able to transform this trauma in her life and turn it into a blessing for our lives, because we took the time and effort to learn about her stories of challenges and resilience. So this is one of the reasons why my wife Teresa and I started Korean American Story, to enable other families to capture their oral history, but also to encourage intergenerational dialogue, I think, which could heal the generational trauma of the Korean War.
I totally agree. And on top of what you just said, I just want to mention that it's been already over 70 years since the beginning of the Korean War. Many people immigrated to the US with a memory or experience of the war. But those who actually lived the war is dying out. There are not many actually people who are still living. It's just next generation who are conveying the stories and memories of the war to the community right now. So the work like Jaime does is really important, and it has new lights to the community. Because first, Korean War as a Korean American is just part of our identity. It's not something that isolates us from the Korea's past, because we are living as a Korean American in this society. Second, I don't think Korean issue is not the American issue. I think Korean issue is American issue. If we look at the news these days, something happening in South Korea, North Korea are our issue, and America is deeply involved historically, politically, culturally with things happening in Korea. So the next generation, like Jaime's, her contemporary peers might consider this not as their parents or grandparents' generations maybe legacy or problem, but that of their generation. Because I don't think the American citizens, we're American citizens, right, are not free from being responsible for what's happening in Korea right now. The Cold War legacies and atrocities being committed around the world, including Korea. So we should all aware of that responsibility as American citizens, not just Korean American. So I think it's really a positive signs to see Jaime's work dealing with the Korean War.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love how we're really considering the fact that intergenerational dialogue needs to happen. We have to really encourage it in order to keep these stories alive, because as you said, Hee-jung, all of these stories, some people may assume that they're only stuck in the past, but even now, it's a lot of people, even now the Korean War has not yet ended. It's still very much a contemporary issue, and it helps. It doesn't even just help, but it just means so much that artists like Jaime are bringing into light the Korean War, because it's still this kind of, these memories of our grandparents are still very much alive today. So thank you both for thinking about that question so thoughtfully. I do want to move on to the next excerpt and transition to it. So in the next video clip that we're going to watch her grandmother as a younger woman and an American soldier engage in a very fun dialogue about combining Spam and kimchi into what Jaime calls into this perfect Frankenstein creation, 부대찌개.
It's not really allowed, but sometimes Koreans sneak out leftovers from the American soldiers.
Sometimes we trade our rations for Korean goods.
There's this recipe people make.
I've seen this new dish.
You take kimchi,
You take baked beans,
tofu,
Vienna sausages,
ramen,
American cheese,
rice cake, and
And
spam.
spam.
And you mix it with American food
and you combine it with Korean food
to make 부대찌개.
to make army-based stew. You'd
You think that these things wouldn't go together? I mean, American food
Korean food
is so exotic. Oh, that fat.
Spice.
And they use so much
And
dairy.
they eat so much rice.
But I swear it's good. You know, canned spam doesn't spoil.
You know you can preserve kimchi for months?
What a magical food. It's so hard to find meat these days. Spam is a luxury.
I'm tired of eating spam all the time, but I'm glad I'm not going hungry.
I could use a good meal. Like I used to before the war.
Like back home.
When the war broke out, I got separated from my family.
When I got drafted, it was hard to leave my family.
I couldn't find my parents,
My wife,
my brother.
my daughter.
I miss them so much. I worry.
I'm afraid
The next bomb
the next bullet
might kill me. But we must reunite.
But I will see them again.
I have to survive this war.
With this clip, I found it especially heartening when this scene ends with a wish from both Jaime's grandmother and the American soldier that they really wish they could reunite with their family members again. For me, this reminded me of the fact that despite the armistice ending hostilities, many Koreans still have family members who are on the other side in North Korea and who separated during the Korean War. In fact, Jaime, in your play, you mentioned that you have relatives on both your maternal and paternal sides who remained in North Korea. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So my grandmother, her hometown was in Kaesong, and my father was born in Pyongyang.
And I think this is such a great conversation that I had with you, Jaime, especially thinking about not North Korea as a country, but just about the individuals, the very people who live in North Korea. And just the fact that it's true, the American and South Korean media both have this way of solely focusing on the human rights issues of North Korea and kind of coloring North Korea in a very specific way. At the same time, though, in doing so, they fail to really individualize the people who are living in North Korea. So my question to panelists is just in the theme of family separation. how do we humanize the way we think about the people in North Korea? And how do we reckon with the memories of our grandparents who still have, recollections of their homes, their physical homes, and the actual family members who they've left behind?
Well, I can say something if no one else wants to jump in, but really the best way to experience North Korea is just to go to North Korea and meet the people there, talk with them, live with them like you would any other culture or society. And I think because there is such a distance between North Korea and everyone else in the world, oftentimes that vacuum is filled with stereotypes and misperceptions of who lives there and what their lives are like. I remember actually having experience with young Korean Americans crossing the DMZ and going into Kaesong. Many of them were in disbelief that people were not lying on the ground dying of starvation. And they kept talking about how the government was staging this for us Korean Americans traveling in this bus as kind of a propaganda ploy. And I think growing up in the United States, we often get blinded by the types of media perceptions that are fed to us every day. And I think really the best antidote to misperceptions and misinformation is just to find out and experience and learn on your own directly with the people who live and work in that society.
Yeah, and I agree. I do think that, on a day-to-day basis, I know that the perspective people have and opinions people have of people in North Korea or North Korea itself is so largely negative for fair reasons. There are a lot of human rights issues that are going on. But as far as the people themselves, I mean, I remember basically thinking like South Koreans are good and North Koreans are evil.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the message that I get from the media. And also just in my general life, when people ask a question like, are you from South Korea or North Korea? Right. And so and especially as Korean Americans, we definitely hold on to a history that involves America. It's a very polarizing political subject, and so when we directly apply it to our own lives, and especially because and John, I agree. I think like actually visiting would be amazing, and actually reconnecting with family would be amazing. But the fact is, like, there's now a travel ban against all Americans, so we can't go there, right? So I think the best way for me personally to humanize is to be able to kind of look inwards and think about the friends and family I have that humanize North Korea because it's part of just our ancestry, that it hasn't been split for that long. It's only been 70 years since the war started. So yeah, I think just acknowledging that history itself is a way to humanize it.
Yeah, I mentioned our legacy project. We recorded about 180 stories, and a lot of those stories pertain to people who went through the Korean War, both from the North and the South. And it's heartbreaking to hear these stories. And once you start understanding the kind of trials that they went through and the pains that they suffered from being separated from their families, it's really hard to dehumanize them. And I think so the importance of, once again, making sure we share those stories is paramount. Additionally, we've also recorded stories of Dr. James Kim, who started PUST and UST, which is Pyongyang University of Science and Technology. I also interviewed people who going in, starting medical school, tried to start medical school there. So there are a large numbers of Koreans and Korean Americans that are going into North Korea for humanitarian efforts. Even, obviously right now there's a lot of travel ban and things like that, so you can't really get there, but there have been a lot of groundwork that's been laid. And some of those people have shared stories. So what you hear are things like reusing disposable gloves or catheters that has lost its lubrication. There's issues of poverty, and yet there's still people who are eager to learn so that their country could progress and so that they could take care of their people. So it's realizing that there are people doing work at a very human level. I think that gives me hope, and that those stories also need to be shared so that we could see them as people who need help, not as people who are demonized.
It's kind of very distressing to see the travel ban because we are living in America. We can complain about the travel ban, but think about those who are living in Korea who could never ever travel to North Korea legally. When the war ended, they were talking about 10 million divided families. Right now, I think they are talking about only 50,000 people still living separated from their family in the north. So I think the family reunion is the most urgent, fundamental remedy for those who were divided and separated with their family members. If they cannot happen like right now, what can we do? Maybe something like what Jamie does. Her grandmother probably will be very happy to see her granddaughter working on that kind of project based on her past, her memory. So we should have more projects like that, like grassroots campaigns for peace in Korean Peninsula, and have to seek ways to install this permanent system of peaceful coexistence if it is not a reunification between two Koreas. So we should continue our efforts to bring that kind of era of peace together.
Yeah, thank you so much, panelists, for delving more into, and to you too, Jamie, for delving more into this topic. And just considering, I do feel really, I'm sure everyone does feel this too, really distraught and hopeless at the fact that reunification seems so far, and it's been very far for a long time. Like everyone has mentioned, what we can do is definitely, think about the grassroots efforts in order to consider perhaps the families will reunite. The many families that are still separated will reunite someday. And also really uplift those who are still in, actually medically working, as H.J. Lee mentioned, at that level. Like, what are their stories? What are the people, what are those stories? Those the people who are actually working within North Korea and trying to help remedy the situation there. So I think this is such a multi-layered question. And I do want to, we're going very much outside the macro economic level right now. And I want to kind of hone in to Jamie's next share, which will be a live reading. And we're thinking about North and South Korea and the devastating separation and our hopes for eventual reunification. But right now we're going to think about, we're going to first experience Jamie's reading of a part of her script, where she goes back to the timeline, to the modern day, starting with her parents' immigration to Brooklyn, New York, and then going back in time, reflecting on the photographs of her family members before her parents moved to America. So Jamie, I'll hand off the mic to you to begin your presentation.
This is when my parents first moved to New York in the 70s, before they had children. First adventures at Coney Island. They were so happy and free before they had us. Ah, my mom fishing in Shipshead Bay. Check out those bell bottoms. Fishing is more of my dad's thing. He probably dragged her into it. Oh, here's their clothing store in Bensonhurst. They named it Clara's World after my mom. The shop was at 86th Street underneath the train tracks, so we'd hear them roar by all the time. Oh yeah, this was taken the first day they opened. My dad worked there for 30 years, and the store pretty much stayed this way with those same racks and handwritten prices. Even after my mom moved to Manhattan and got big in fashion, his store never changed. This house hasn't really changed either. My dad retrieved everything my mom tried to throw out before we moved. He told me each item holds priceless memories, even if my mom says it's priceless because it's trash. We're more alike than I thought. I have a hard time letting go of things too. Oh, and here, he kept all their photos from Korea. These are photos of my mom's parents. My grandma's so elegant and youthful here. She looks surprisingly regal. I know she was really struggling though, so she probably got all done up for this photo. Wow, my grandpa really looks like my mom. And he's really handsome. It's nice to know there's some good looks in my genes. Oh, and my dad showed me photos I'd never seen before. This is my dad and his siblings. You see the kid in the black coat? That's my dad. It's interesting to see my dad as a little kid. He has the same face. I can recognize all my aunts and uncles in this photo. My dad was born up north in Pyongyang. He told me when the war broke out, my grandma was pregnant and was scared for her children. My grandparents owned a factory and they knew their wealth would make them a target. So she converted whatever money she could into gold bars, tied them around her waist, and gathered her children to move south. Her brother was a doctor in the military and helped her escape. You see that man standing second to the left? That's him, my great uncle. But my grandpa stayed behind. He believed the war would subside, so he lived in a hideout, storing their savings in a chimney with the hopes that his family can get back home and things would return to normal. He waited for 2 years. When he learned the demarcation line was drawn and no one could leave, he burned all his money in that chimney. He hired a smuggler to help him cross Hangang, the Han River. Bombs fell, and he was one of the few who survived that crossing. This was taken shortly after he reunited with my grandma and his children, meeting my aunt for the first time since she was in the womb. He found that my grandma had been supporting the family by buying and selling supplies from US Army bases. My dad's the one smiling in the middle. The other children are a mix of my uncles and aunts, maybe some neighborhood children. I don't know who they are. As they rebuilt their life and soul, my grandma mourned her sister. who was captured when they tried to flee, and her brothers, who were never found. My grandpa ached for his parents and brother, who were trapped in Pyongyang. My grandpa held on to the hope of moving back to North Korea. He reminisced about his youth, the life he had, the life he should have had, just like my dad feels about moving to America. My maternal grandma lives in Washington now, close to my mom's siblings. She's 92 years old, and it's hard for her to travel, so we chat on the phone. I have to visit her more often. My dad's parents stayed in Korea. This was taken the first time they visited New York. My dad said he felt like he had to prove something to them because my grandpa wasn't thrilled that he moved here. He had a complicated relationship with his dad. My dad asked if they'd consider moving to America, but my grandpa replied, "We've already had to immigrate once. We're not doing it again." This is the only surviving photo from North Korea that we know of. My grandma resting in a field. I don't think this is a formal photo with the way she's holding a random thing and casually sitting on the ground. But it's so well composed. It feels like a good one to have. My grandparents abandoned most of their belongings in Pyongyang when they fled south, and my parents left behind most of their possessions in Seoul when they moved to the US. When my grandparents passed away, their house was sold and everything there was thrown away. So this is what I'm left with. What has survived? They're survived by me.
Wow, thank you so much, Jamie, for that live script reading. And just from that excerpt of that script, I was especially survived by that last line where you share basically where you say that you inherit remnants of the past and that you survive, that they're survived by you, these remnants. And that particularly resonated with me personally because I remember going through these very old photographs of my grandparents too. And before I got to know them, my grandparents on both sides of my family actually passed away. So I personally had no way of really finding out what happened throughout their lives. And your project actually inspired me to try and learn more about our country, the Korean War, and its effect today, its many effects today. And this question is also from the conversations that we've had. And it's a question that I'd like to ask to the panelists as well. It's a particular thing to know your past, because I think that knowing your past really makes you rooted in knowing who you are, knowing your identities. So if anyone could share, how has learning about your family's experiences, especially in the Korean War, how have those memories that you've inherited impacted who you are today?
Hi, I just wanted, it's not my personal family experiences, but this is in the context of the work at the KAFSC. We serve survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse, but also not all, but many of them are elders coming into our doors. And as we untangle their traumatic experience by the violence, oftentimes what we encounter is the traumatic experiences from the Korean War. So these women share the traumatic experiences that were impacted their lives through the Korean War, which shaped their views on male figure sometimes, and their relationship with their daughters. And I found it very fascinating, for the lack of a better term, to see how the traumatic experiences through the Korean War followed them throughout their lives. So as we untangle, like I mentioned, about the trauma through the violence, what we have to really untangle really is the traumatic experiences that they had during the Korean War.
Thank you so much for that share, Jihei. And I'm just imagining during the video share, when you mentioned the violence, and then afterwards, when you mentioned how you and your organization envisions of violence-free homes for all, that part especially resonated with me. And I feel like a lot of people today, thinking about Black Lives Matter and how big this topic is of stopping and ending violence, confronting the violence that has happened in the past, as you've put it, untangling these violent memories in order to uplift and think about how we can confront all this violence now. So learning from the past and thinking about now.
Yeah, I just want to say that, Jamie, that was just beautiful. I mean, I was deeply moved, and the old photos are just beautiful on their own, but when you interweave your personal story like that, it's just so powerful to me. After having interviewed so many people, I could tell you that story, while incredibly personal and unique to you, as a community, there are so many of those stories, and each one is miraculous. There's a miracle somewhere that allowed them to survive. So many people had to cross the Han River, things like that. So for sake of time, I'll just skip my personal stuff, but I did want to raise one particular group of people that when I was thinking about how has this war really directly impacted, I'm reminded of the adoptees and the GI wives. In particular, for example, I can tell you that since the Hart-Celler Act of 65, 68, the doors opened. Prior to that, there were about 10,000 Koreans in America. 70 census show that it went up to 69,000. But anyway, so the numbers were very small prior to the doors opening for us. But post 53, there's estimated somewhere around 6,500 GI wives and about 6,200 adoptees that came into the country. That's almost equivalent to the population of Korean Americans at the time. So they are a group that are directly impacted by the Korean War, and they're part of our community, right? And so one particular story I want to share with you is of one of our board members, Thomas Park Clement. He was born in 1952, or possibly 53. He doesn't know exactly. He was adopted when he was 7 years old. And he told me about the nightmares he would have, where even after being adopted, he would have nightmares in the middle of the night where he would go headfirst into his parents' rooms and just dive because he was so terrified. At age 68, he still has these nightmares. And he said to me, the first time he remembers distinctly when he walked, because he said he remembers, it was probably about when he was 1 year old. He said, I wanted to see what all the bombing was going on outside, all the flashing. So he remembers standing up to see that. And I thought, wow, trauma must run deep, because I can't remember like anything before I was 20, like it's just incredible how much they could retain. The trauma ingrains in you these types of memories. So I just want to lift up those folks as people who have been directly impacted by the Korean War.
Thank you so much for sharing the story about the HJ, especially about the Korean adoptees. And that really speaks a lot to me in terms of the bombings that happened, the actual physical, like violent events that happened, and how this one person individual was able to even carry those nightmares on even to this point.
Yeah.
And I think that just particularly speaks to how it's so important now more than ever for Jamie's project to be uplifted, because these stories really need to be shared. and discussed. And so we did want to leave some time at the end to open up our discussion to question and answer from the audience. And so let's see, the first one, okay, is from Branka. Can the panelists elaborate more on the status of North Koreans in South Korea? How were they generally treated, and what were the socioeconomic circumstances they were faced with when they emigrated?
I think it's not a simple question, so the answer is not very simple. It's very complicated in many aspects, from political, cultural, social, even language-wide. But one thing very clear for these defectors is they are experiencing a lot of difficulties in adjusting themselves in the society. There are some celebrities actually who rose from the defector status to the status of celebrities in South Korea, but most defectors, I think, having a lot of struggles and difficulties making their lives and confronting the daily sort of biases, if it is not discrimination based on where they are from. So some even emigrated to other countries. Some came to the US and to European countries. Australia is one of the places many people went over. So the situation is kind of complex as far as I know.
Thank you, Professor Son. I think that it's like such a wide range. So I completely understand we can't really, it's hard to encapsulate the different kinds of defectors, North Koreans who come over to South Korea. It's hard to summarize that. There's lots of different scenarios that happen. Just seeing if there's any more questions or comments from, I'm just seeing the chat box that either Kelly or Sean can put. Yeah. Okay. So this question is from So-young. When was the last time South Koreans visited family members in North Korea? I watched videos of unity a few years ago. That's a great question. I actually don't remember. Definitely not recently, I think. I don't have the exact year, but I feel like this hasn't happened in a while, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I know that my grandma got the opportunity to reunite with her family in Kaesong in the 80s. I mean, there have been reunification events after that too. Though, yeah, she told me when she got to reunite with, I believe, her brothers and their children. And yeah, at the time, like she was just there for a short while, and she felt like they were in a time capsule. Everything about the house was exactly the same, and they were just really grateful to see each other. But yeah, I have seen some reunification footage too, which is always really heartbreaking when they get like these tour buses to like leave finally, and people are just like losing their minds. I can't imagine. I mean, even when there wasn't a travel ban for Americans, because before you could go as a tourist and like be very chaperoned, but you could have gone. I chose not to go, even though I had the opportunity to, because like I just didn't know how I'd feel about supporting the regime, and this was way before I even started this project and really started delving into my own family history. But I do hope that one day I can do like a family search, even if that just means being able to access some ancestry archive somehow, even if there's some way to do it from South Korea, I would love to do that.
I just did a quick Google search and found that the last one was in August 2018. I remember that after the series of summits between North and South in the year of 2018, and also the summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un in June of 2018, they organized this meeting, but it was very limited in number. So not very many people actually could join this reunion event. So it was just ended as an event, unfortunately. And after that, there's no follow-up meetings or any other concrete planning for the another family reunion yet.
Just to pick up a little bit on what Jamie was talking about, my father-in-law went to North Korea, I think 2 or 3 times for the reunification process in the 80s and 90s. And his experience, I mean, I can't talk about everyone's, but his experience was such, like what you alluded to, you know, supporting the regime and all that. And they were heavily chaperoned, but he did meet a lot of the relatives, and that was the wonderful part. But then, you know, he got letters saying, can you send some money? You know, and so he's like, oh, of course. And he would send money. And then you kind of figure out that, you know, it's probably being cut along the way. And you wonder if they're actually getting anything. And after having done that for many years, he decided, you know what, I just can't do this anymore. So, it was a sad ending. And eventually he felt like I just can't go back again. And so it's not just the reunification, it's the whole change in, system that would allow families to actually connect and stay connected, I think I'm sure just seeing each other would be great, but there's much longer term solutions that have to be worked out as well, I think.
Thank you so much. I think, pointing out the fact that the topic of reunification is not a simple one. It is a multi-step, a very long process that we have to, I think, hopefully will be considered very time soon. And I do thank you so much, panelists, for talking about this issue and answering the questions about especially between North and South Korea. I think we have reached time, and so I will go on into concluding tonight's program. Yeah, and I'm just sorry, I would just need to take a moment to process all of these amazing contributions you've all made to the discussion, around Jamie's play, which is just so amazing in itself. So I do want to thank you again very much for joining us tonight for ACP Live. Thank you to the audience for joining us, centering and showcasing Jaime Sunwoo's especially Process American Me. And I do want to list the community partners and thank them as well. So huge thanks to our community partners for this evening. QCA의 and Flushing Town Hall, our host for tonight's evening. Also the Korean American Family Service Center, our featured community partner. KoreanAmericanStory.org, Korea Society, and Queen's Memory are community partners who helped promote tonight's program. Special thanks to Jihye Fisher, Professor Hee Jung-sun, John Cho, and H.J. Lee for participating in tonight's panel. Of course, also thank you to Alex Lee for live captioning Korean. And thank you to Mary Ellen for virtually doing everything and putting this all up for us. Thank you to Sean Choi for putting in monitoring all the different chat boxes. Again, as a last reminder, we are working with the Korean American Family Service Center to split donations from this program. We'd so appreciate it if you could contribute at whatever amount. The link is in the program description at the bottom if you just scroll down. And now I'm going to turn over the mic to Kelly to end the program and to share more information about next week's ACP Live. Thank you all.
Hi, everyone. Oh my gosh, Sejin, thank you for an incredible moderating an incredible discussion. That was really lovely all. Yes, so I just want to say that you can tune in next Thursday at 7 p.m. for ACP Live Presents Marcus Yee, which we're presenting in partnership also with Flushing Town Hall, as well as alongside our friends at the Queens Historical Society. Marcus is our fellow ACP Artists Commissioning Program awardee for Flushing, and will be showcasing a work in progress and discussion of his project, Lucky 88 Food Court the Musical, which is a forthcoming show inspired by all of the food courts in Flushing, using this environment to explore the multifaceted lives of people that the average American might not otherwise get to know, like the parent at the hand-pulled noodle stall, or a widow at the dumpling stall who is ready to start dating again, to name a few. So to meet the rest of the characters, you'll have to RSVP. Link is in the chat, and you can join us next Thursday at 7 p.m. Thank you all so much, and good night, everyone.